welcome everyone. What a pleasure it is to have you all here. Wonderful to have you with us, Sarah, again for a talk about pizza, but not only pizza, I think. We're going to talk about many other things, I'm sure, as well.
Always a pleasure.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to see you. So let me just see if I can find a way to stop screen sharing. I don't think I can. I can. Oh, here we go. Just after using, Zoom for, I don't know, 2 years, still have no idea how to find the right buttons. How are you feeling today, Sarah?
Good. Excited. Lots of stuff, lots of feelings actually today.
Oh, I think we'll talk about that. Jock was wondering, if it would be probably a good idea to introduce you formally, because I never introduce you, do I? I always miss that somehow. We just jump right away. So Sarah is an incredible person, an incredible kind human being. That's it. Well, that's the start, at least. Well, Sarah has been working a lot all around accessibility, front end, well, front of the front of the front. Is that right? Something like that.
Front of the front end.
Yes, front end, and specifically focused on accessibility, inclusive design. Also, a UX designer by trade or by choice. I mean, you are. Well, I remember working with you. You are, whether you want to admit it or not.
Well, I hear that a lot, and mainly, actually, it was Dan Moll who told me that there's a designer in me and that I just don't know it. But I mean, I love design. I have a very, very soft spot for it, but I have no background in design whatsoever. So I still find myself
makes you a designer.
I mean, we're all designers if you think about it that way. We're all, even developers, we are designing the experience, because every decision that we take as design engineers, so front of the front end developer, the term that I've been using is design engineer, because I think the first time I read it was in an article by Jonathan Snook. It was years ago. So as a design engineer, pardon, the decisions that we make, like how we build something, the markup that we write, and how we style things, and how they affect the user experience. I mean, this is technically design. It's not visual design, but it is design. So yes, I am a designer, but I'm not a designer in the common sense, although I wish I were.
Yes, so I think it's one of the most remarkable things about you is that you always kind of jump in between different areas, but in all of them very, very deeply. So I think that I don't know still any more knowledgeable person than you when it comes to SVG. And then when it comes to accessibility, although we have, of course, Adrian here in the house, and Adrian knows a lot about accessibility, a lot. And thank you so much, Adrian, by the way, for leaving wonderful comments on accessibility also on the Smashing magazine, by the way. I read them very carefully and thoroughly. So good job. Excellent. Oh, Adrian's giving me a thumbs up. I'm very happy now. Excellent. But today it's a smashing hour. And what does it mean? Well, just going to explain briefly to people who are maybe for the first time in here, that's a very informal way of us of getting together and talking about things that might help you get better at your work, but also getting better personally, professionally, in either way that you see fit. So your questions are very much encouraged. If you assume that there is a script that we're following in every, smashing hour by letter, that's not true. Is that right, Sarah?
There is no script at all. I mean, not even high level points or anything. We improvise the whole thing. I mean, to be completely honest, like we have like maybe 3 items on a list. Like we probably might discuss this and that, but we don't always stick to that. So the conversation just flows, and everyone who is in the conversation can help steer it in one direction or the other.
Right. So I thought it would be a good idea to start with a topic that I actually just very, very curious about, but then we'll dive right away into your questions. So feel free to unmute yourself when you're, not when we're not speaking, right? If you want to ask a question, or you can also write in the chat. So we're very much excited about your questions, right? That would be ideal. Sarah, just before we start, like diving in, well, your video course. Do you want to share a little bit something maybe with us?
Do you have any specific questions? Because I've been working on this for 8 months straight. I know I announced the course last year in April, right? So it's been more than a year and a half. But during last year, that's 2021, I worked on it on and off. And most of the work during that year was a lot of planning, a lot of research, a lot of planning again, and working on the actual website for the course. So I built the whole thing from scratch. I did some research. I looked into the different video platforms that are available, and I'm very, very picky about things, and I tend to have like a perfectionist nagging on me all the time. So some of them I didn't like the design, some of them I didn't like it was not fully accessible, the platform, or it was limited because I have a specific idea in my mind about how I want the course to be. So I want there to be a video, a clear navigation between the chapters. I call each one of the
yes.
chapters.
Ideally, you want to set up teams.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah,
so
sorry.
I had this very clear idea in my mind, and there's going to be the videos, of course, that are going to be captioned, and I wanted to have transcripts, but they're not really transcripts. So I'm starting in reverse. So I started writing the content and preparing it before I started recording it. And with some of the content, it was somewhere in between. So not fully written, but there was a lot of going back and forth between the different types of the different formats, which I wanted to have for the content. So I spent most of last year, I worked on a lot of client projects, and there was speaking and there was building the actual website. The reason you asked me before we started the official, I think that was 15 minutes ago or something, you were curious about why I chose to build the website from scratch. That was one of the reasons, because the platforms are fine. I know a lot of people love them, but I have this specific vision in my mind about what I wanted the course to be and how I wanted it to look and how I wanted the content to be. So for every chapter right now, I have the video, captioned videos, and then there's the navigation, which looks a little bit like YouTube, but not too much because I'm not a designer, so that I got some inspiration from here and there. And then under the video, you have the content of the chapter in written format. So if you want to watch it, you can watch it in the video, or if you want to read it, you can get everything out of it just like you would if you watch the video. So you can choose either or. And that was the reason I wanted to build the website, because I wanted full control over everything, basically, the design and the content. I chose Eleventy because it's extremely flexible and because I love it, and I use it to build my website, and I've used it for a couple of other projects in the last few years. So I've built the whole thing from scratch. I designed the whole thing, although I'm not 100% happy with the design, although some people have told me that it's actually good, but I don't know. I'm still skeptical about that.
Well, you're always a perfectionist. You've always been. So it's like, I think that you just going back and forth, just trying to find just the right shade of a right color or just the right size for font size. But then, the one thing that I learned, and again, this is just me, of course, but I used to be so obsessed with pixels and the font size and the right colors, and I would be just spending so much time on it. And I thought at some point, you know what, I'm going to try to give it up this notion of perfectionism. I'm still not sure if this is a good idea or not, but for me, it's just about, I want to have this idea kind of floating in the space, to kind of shaping itself almost. So I get it out there, and then as time passes by, I see it maybe differently, like 2 or 3 days later, and then I keep adjusting. So it's more like an evolving creature rather than just, oh, I need to make it just right. So that kind of helped me, but it's just me. There was no question in there, though. Yeah.
But for something like the course website, your course website is gorgeous, because you got all that branding going on and the font and the colors and all of that. I wish I could design something like that myself, but I'm not that skilled. Someone is asking about who is your target audience. It's going to be mainly design engineers, basically front and back end developers. But if a designer takes the course, they're going to get a lot out of it as well. Something I've learned from working with basically in all of my client projects, I tend to work with designers directly. And whenever I've worked with the designers, I've learned that they're just as capable at understanding the technical part of accessibility, for example, just as other developers can. So I think I don't want to overpromise, so I'll need to think about the designers being an audience a little bit more. But I think I try to strike a very good balance between theory and application, and between design and development at the same time. And by design, I don't mean colors and contrasts and stuff like that. Even designers can understand the content. I think that every designer will be able to take the course and understand. If anything, it's going to make communication between design and development much easier. The course is very practical, it's very technical. We will alternate between theory and application because it's important, but while the theoretical chapters are theoretical in nature, they provide very high practical value. So
Right.
it's foundational knowledge that you need in order to build things, to write code properly.
Right.
So developers, design engineers, and even designers who are interested in learning how to write HTML and CSS or understand accessibility or the constraints, because a designer at some point or another, they need to understand the technical constraints when it comes to accessibility so that they can design for those constraints. So I would say that even designers can take the course, yes, but the main audience is definitely going to be developers.
Yeah, one thing I also should add at this point that Sara is doing that while also working with clients on all kind of accessibility projects, well, building accessible web, I would say. That's definitely something that Sara is working on. And I think I'm very much excited about the course. I mean, I've been knocking on the doors already, I don't know for how many months, right? Like, Sara, when will we get that? I want to get in, right? But yeah, I'm very much hopeful and excited to see how it's going to be when it actually turns out and go live. And Eve is bringing up an interesting point that Eve is also, hello, Eve, by the way. Eve is creating an internal Udemy accessibility course for my work, and I know the struggle, the perfectionist in me is slowing me down so much. They always do, all these perfectionist kind of things, they always do. And then Ethan says, you know, let's just let the content be, and we can have the perfect interface a little bit later. But in fact, yes, and thank you, Daniel, for bringing in the link in the chat as well. This is a joke focused specifically on front-end accessibility, and I'm very much excited about that. Sara, maybe speaking on that, and again, this is just something I wanted to bring up, and it's not like I have tons of questions prepared, but this is definitely something that I've been asked for the last couple of weeks, and I couldn't find the right answer, to be honest. So there seems to be, how would I put it best? There seems to be a little bit of, maybe actually Adrian from the accessibility community here can also help, because I'm being asked, so is WCAG 3.0 going to change everything for us? Some people are very excited about it. Some people are very skeptical about it. And then there's also WCAG 2.2. So maybe, I mean, I don't know if Sara, this is, if that's the right time to ask, but I'm just wondering, where are we now? So it seems like we have these two different things that are happening, and we also have, you know, WCAG right now as well. So, well, the older version, if you like. What should we be keeping in mind as designers with this in mind?
I don't like to, I don't know what the word for that in English is, but basically I don't think, or I don't dive into something that, okay, let me rephrase that again. WCAG 3 is not even close at this moment. So I think it's going to be years before WCAG 3 is going to be ready. So I'm not diving into it. I know that there's a lot of changes going to be with the structure of WCAG, the terminology, the success criteria, things like the way we discuss success criteria is even going to change. So currently my focus is on 2.1, 2.2, basically the dot version of WCAG 2. With WCAG 2.2, we have I have a tab open here with the updates that are coming to WCAG 2.2. Some of them are about focus appearance, focus not being obscure, dragging movements, target size, which is important for mobile users, for example, accessible authentication and redundant entries. So there are a few success criteria that have been added to WCAG 2.1 and 2.0 and 2.1. But with WCAG 3, I'm not even diving into it at all. So
Okay.
I do mention it in the course, because there's a chapter on WCAG, everything you need to know, a complete guide. And I do mention that there's going to be a WCAG 3. It's going to change a lot about the structure of WCAG as we know it now, but it's not going to happen before at least a few years, because even WCAG 2.2, I think, has been postponed till sometime early next year, even though it was supposed to be this year, before the end of the year. So I just don't dive into something that's years ahead.
Yeah, sure. That makes sense. That makes sense. I mean, the reason why I bring this up is because I'm just also now working on this big project, and there is this big consideration about accessibility. And I'm so happy, by the way, that I remember vividly this not being the case just, I mean, maybe 5 years ago, maybe a little bit more than that. But accessibility was like, later. But now it's like when I'm working in project, it's like, well, you start thinking about what are the accessibility constraints, what do we need to do, what designers need to know about, things from color contrast to interaction design, right? And I mean, I'm in a position right now, and you tell me if you feel the same way or not. But I feel like I'm in a position right now where clients do not come to me asking for hover menus anymore. Like mega drop-down hover menus. It's not quite happening. I mean, every now and again, there is this conversation, but it's not like, oh, we want to have a mega hover menu, because obviously it has to work on mobile, and obviously it has to be fully accessible. So it's almost like a default. Maybe these dear friends here in the chat, please correct me if I'm wrong. Is it more like a default these days that menus that are being built, if they need to be mega drop-downs, that they're going to be operating on click or on tap rather than hover? Or is it still a fight worth fighting?
Well, it's definitely a fight worth fighting. The last time I built it wasn't even a hover menu. It was designed to be a hover menu, but we had a discussion, the designer and I, and it was like, I've mentioned him in previous Smashing Hours. It was Jan Percy, who's German. He's amazing. So we communicated at every single phase of the project and every single component, because we worked on components, not just the entire design. So yeah, as Adrian mentions, 1.4.13 is like the success criteria: failure, risk for hover menus. You risk basically, what's wrong with my English today? So you would fail certain.
Yeah, I mean, you would not be able to complete a particular task if you just operate on hover, right? And some people will not be able to get there, right? And this is kind of what is like what I see just as a major issue most of the time, and it seems like it's. I don't know, for me personally, it seems like it's changing a little bit. So I think, well, at least I'm staying hopeful, right? Maybe just me being lucky. I don't know. Philip is mentioning here in the chat, we'll switch to click mega drop down sometimes next year, Swiss Post. Oh, I like your design system, Philip, that you have started working on. That's pretty cool. That's nice to see you here in the chat as well. There was also this really interesting accessibility study that was published, I think, a week ago. If I'm not mistaken, maybe I can share the screen. Again, at this point, if you, dear friends, have a particular question that you'd like to bring up, I'm happy to oblige and follow your lead. But I just wanted to share and discuss maybe a couple of things with you, Sarah, if you see it kind of in the same way or not. But this is the one that was published by Level Access, I think, literally like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And there were a couple of things which are kind of interesting, and specifically when I think about challenges. And I'm not. Oh yes, sure. I think I should not be sharing. Oh, hold on. Now it's shared. I should not be sharing the link to the PDF directly, but just for the sake of brevity here, I will. That's the one. And so there are a couple of things. And one thing that was interesting for me to see is, what do teams in general struggle with when it comes to accessibility, right? And that's one thing that they have here on page number 16. It's like a really big document, actually, 52 pages or so, where they did this quite great research, I think, when I look at this, right? And so think about the job function specifically. What challenges does the accessibility program face? Or specifically, I mean, another way, what challenges do you have, right? And this is actually a bit surprising to me. So 61.4% answered that incorporating accessibility earlier in the development life cycle is still a big issue. So we just don't think about accessibility early enough. So, and it's interesting for me because, well, I remember vividly that not being a part of the discussion at all, not being a conversation at all. And it seems like, again, for me today, and maybe I'm just in a privileged position, accessibility is considered in the very first meeting. It's kind of almost a default behavior, default expectation. Would you say that this is kind of similar to your work, Sarah?
It is definitely, but I would also say that, like you said, it could be just privilege. Basically, for me, I would definitely identify that as privilege because, and I say this in the most humble way possible, when clients get in touch with me, they get in touch with me for my expertise in front end in general, including accessibility. So when they hire me because they know that I am going to help them like improve the usability and accessibility, etc. So they come to me, they already know what they want. And if they don't, they are more than open to listen to me. So I've had clients come to me and they didn't think about accessibility beforehand, but when I discussed it with them and because they trust my skills and my expertise, they were more than happy to implement it. But I know for sure that not all clients are like that. Not every developer's or consultant's clients is going to be like that. But at the same time, I am noticing that there's a lot more awareness on accessibility in the field in general. So whether that's between designers and developers or in companies in general. And I think, I don't have the legal knowledge here, but I think that basically being afraid of getting sued.
Oh, sorry. I think you're muted, Sarah. That was weird. Okay, just for a moment. Okay. So...
I don't know what happened. I didn't mute myself.
I don't know. I just disappeared for a moment. That's okay. That's okay. But
okay.
You were saying? No, I forgot.
Yeah, I forgot.
That's okay. It will probably come to us. But I think that indeed, so this perception of accessibility definitely seems to have changed. Indeed. Melissa said, unfortunately, I've worked with many clients who know nothing about accessibility. There are many clients who just want a new website without thinking of accessibility. I wouldn't say it's common yet. I'm always happy when clients mention it, though. Otherwise, it's on me to educate them. I think that's pretty much
I think that's the case for most designers and developers, even those that I know. I know a lot of people who still tell me that they struggle with their clients and that they don't care about accessibility enough. And the second here in the PDF that you shared, so the second one is time to implement or fix accessibility. I mean, that's because they're not incorporating accessibility earlier in the developer site. And accessibility earlier is not happening because there's not enough training on accessibility, which is the third point. So I think that the more training, the more awareness on accessibility, the more education, and which is shameless plug, which is one of the reasons why I'm making the accessibility course.
Exactly.
If you take that course and you become more proficient with accessibility, it's going to become much easier for you to incorporate it into your work. There are a lot of things on accessibility that I do without even asking for permission, because like I said, the decisions that you take as a developer, how you implement it, the markup that you choose, you're not going to go ask a stakeholder what markup you should choose to build something. It's on you to decide that. So if you have the knowledge and you know how you should be implementing it, then a lot of these issues could be solved just by training, taking Sarah's course, and then incorporating accessibility earlier in your development cycle. I don't.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Kevin also brought up the point. You were talking about the fear of being sued by those companies. This is probably where the connection broke.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a little bit of an issue because in general, when I try to convince of anything, like, because again, we have like in Europe, it's the European Union, we have GDPR, and then many clients go, well, yeah, there is GDPR, but it's only a handful of sites that are being kind of penalized for that. So, we're still going to plug in Google Analytics because we need the data. Although the data that is being collected is never really used, at least meaningfully. Just let's just have it. Like, this is kind of the spirit sometimes. For accessibility, the point of, well, we don't want to be sued never really worked for me. I kind of need to work beyond that. It's like, oh, well, there's a handful of companies that are being sued. We're a small company. Who cares about us? And, all that. This is sometimes the spirit. Do you feel like this notion of legal disputes and legal obligations, that this is valid? And again, maybe that's also a question for everyone, actually. Is it a point that clients respect and listen to? Is it enough?
I think, like you said, it depends on the size of the company, and it depends on where you are located as well. Because I've recently read an article by Ben Myers. It's fantastic. So again, I lack the vocabulary to talk about legal stuff. I just don't have the vocabulary in my brain for this. But basically, there's going to be hopefully new laws in the US that are going to be enforced, or hopefully being discussed so that they can be enforced. The too long didn't read of that is that every single website, it needs to be accessible. It has to be accessible to abide to these laws. So I think that the more laws there are, the more it will help. So I don't know, like I don't have the
but you're right.
international knowledge on this.
Surely, yes, if there is a legislative framework that requires us to kind of to abide by the law, then of course there will be more companies doing that. But I think one significant thing where I try to succeed, and I usually fail, to be honest, is to convince managers that there is also a financial benefit of being more accessible. Right? There's a huge, there are so many different facets that people don't really think about. Like one interesting thing that I discovered just recently, there was a talk by, I can maybe post later in links on Twitter, by, I forgot the name, sorry, about age-friendly design. And I'm not talking about, specifically the font sizes and the color contrast. This is a basic, this is a given. But there were many things like motoric functions and other things which need to really, everything okay, Sarah?
We lost power. So I don't know, you can.
Yeah,
it's back.
Okay.
That's
okay.
normal in Lebanon, it's okay.
Okay, so
at any point,
okay, either way,
just ignore the lighting on my side when that happened. It's okay.
I thought maybe it's like a disco going on. Who knows? But right. The point was, no, I forgot where I stopped. No, don't worry.
So statistics and aged.
Yeah. So that was an interesting story, because actually, when there are tons of things that are very different for people in different age. So when you look into, let's say, subgroups like 50 plus, 60 plus, 70 plus, 80 plus, they all have very, very different, how would I put it best, features that the website might need to provide. And it goes way beyond like having, color contrast and things like that. Sometimes if you just have links, they need to just have bigger padding. But of course, if you have bigger padding on links, everybody benefits from it. It's not like it's, only for a small group of people. And then you start including, age-friendly design and inclusive design and people with disabilities and people with temporary disabilities and all of that in a group. And then all of a sudden you have a tremendous business case that you can make, because you're basically actively or passively excluding a huge amount of people, a huge amount of your potential clientele, right? So what I would always try is not to argue with legal limitation, because everybody's like, oh, our legal takes care of that. We know what we're doing. But like, how much you're losing here in terms of revenue,
user base,
the user base, right, and all of that. There was also a question from a point by Derek. I still spend way too much time convincing clients, prospects that accessibility is necessary. And a tactic that Adrian found effective a decade ago was writing WCAG guarantee clause in the contract. Oh, that's interesting. I haven't seen that before. Caused client to ask compared to other vendors. That's really cool. That's interesting to see. Again, for those of you who might not know, WCAG is a Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This is pretty much one of the set of guidelines for us to make sure that the websites, the applications, the products we're building and creating are accessible, at least to a large group of people, universally accessible. Yeah. Right. Eva is saying, what I find frustrating is that developers are not tested for any knowledge in interviews. So what we get is lots of front-end developers who code up a sea of divs with no context or effort. That's very sad, actually. Yeah, that's stories from, like, we could have a Halloween night on that. Plenty of dark dark stories around that as well. I think the one question that I'm being asked as well a lot, by the way, is where should the accessibility checks live, or in which hands? Who should own it? Is it the role of a front-end developer who is writing it? Is it something that QA, quality assurance team does? Is it something that designers should be doing on their hand? Because, you know, when it comes to color schemes and all that, there needs to be kind of accessibility has to be baked in everywhere, right? So accessibility should be owned by everyone? Or
By
is it
everyone.
like...
By everyone, even with CAG contains success criteria that cover everything from design to implementation. So it's not just one person's job at the company. It shouldn't be one person's job at a company, definitely.
Yeah.
In Tokyo recently.
Yeah, so Boris and Adrian also saying something similar to what we have discussed as well. And also there is, could see from the ableist comments in response to members of the Tweet accessibility team announcing that they were being laid off. The accessibility is widely misunderstood and undervalued. Yes, that's actually a very good point. That was actually a very sad time. I mean, I think in general, it's like, this is a year, quite a year. So let's not talk about that year. But
yeah,
I think it just makes me wonder sometimes that we put priority. I mean, I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anybody, right? And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to any maintainer of any library or any framework or anything. But it makes me just wonder, like, why we often jump to those frameworks of discussions about, I don't know, the best JavaScript way of doing things, while we haven't really covered the basic foundation yet. That's always kind of a story for me. So we kind of just get rid of the accessibility teams, and we just prioritize performance teams. Like just doesn't make sense to me at all. Like at all. I mean, I don't know.
I think
just getting
one of the most common responses that I used to hear or read, or sometimes even got from a few clients in the past was, we don't have a lot of disabled people using our websites. And for them, disability is basically either someone on a wheelchair or someone who's blind. And I've had a designer once tell me, well, nobody is going to use this website if they're blind, because this is a, well, I don't want to be too specific there, but there is always this discussion that disability or accessibility is either a blind user or someone on a wheelchair, and we don't have either of those using our websites. And that is that's an ignorant way of looking at accessibility, because accessibility is not just about blindness, it's not just about wheelchair users, and it's not just about a specific set group of people. I love this quote, I forgot the name of the person who said it, but she said, we're all just temporarily abled, and there are a lot of temporary disabilities. And for example, I have a lot of accessibility features enabled on my laptop because my eyes get super strained when I work for long periods of times. And I would consider that one form of disability. And even though I don't identify as a disabled person myself, and I know a lot of people are like that as well. So there is this misunderstanding that if you're building for accessibility, then you're going to be constrained to a few people who are probably not going to be using your website anyway, but that's completely not true. So I've had some luck with, or other people have had some luck more than me, because I've had discussions with those people where they use some sort of statistics. I don't know where they get the statistics from, and sometimes using those Google Analytics and trying to find out, there's a lot of privacy involved. How do you know if someone is using as an assistive technology or not? Yeah. So of course, it's always beneficial or useful if you have statistics at hand, but those are not easy to have all the time. So one hand, because I have one arm, broken arm.
Yeah, so I think it's all like many stories that I can hear or read here in the chat are very much reflecting what you are saying as well. And you know, I mean, I always try to make a point. So maybe I mean, I don't mean to brag, but for me it was like a very important discussion that I had to make. And so what I started working on, maybe it will help somebody as well at this point. I started working on this notion of trying to bring things into perspective. So right now I have this big project with the European Parliament. And then the very first thing that we actually started looking at, what do we do for accessibility? And I think that this, right, I probably cannot copy paste it right away, but I can make a copy of that. So the very first thing that we decided to do is to make it very, very clear, like what kind of accessibility features we want to support. And so WCAG 2.1 a compliance, and then there is this notion of for every page that we have published, and there is a lot of pages published on the European Parliament site, there are two tools that are being used. One is Site Improve and the other is X. There is also Site Improve browser extension that literally every day scans every page and tries to detect accessibility issues and then flag them. Right. And then, of course, we have some things for images, for videos, for PDFs, because I didn't know, for example, obviously, if you're publishing a PDF, there are plenty of things that can go wrong. And most of the time, when you're exporting from Word or anything else, you will end up with a lot of accessibility issues as well. Oh, I don't think I'm sharing, do I? I'm not sharing. It would be reasonable to share. I always, what is wrong with me today, Sarah? I don't know.
There's nothing wrong with you.
No,
just
yeah. So that's pretty much it, right? So where we go in all the fine details about trying to make sure that images have to be accessible, videos, PDFs, and there is this PDF UA and WCAG compliance as well, and then different user preferences and so on. But the reason why I'm showing this, right, because I always have to demonstrate the value. And this is how I tend to do it. Maybe it will be helpful for some people as well. I try to do research that will fit into the context of what I'm working on. So according to the Strategy for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities by the European Commission, because it is done for the European Parliament, 87 million people in the European Union have some form of disability, right? It's worth noting that 28.4% of persons with disabilities are at risk of poverty or social exclusion, compared to 17.8% without disabilities. By making our assets and resources fully accessible, we make the content accessible universally. That was a much stronger point, actually, than any conversations about lawsuits. Obviously, it's European Parliament, so you don't need to even talk about that, right? But this is something that I always bring up. So it was just to show the value for the business or for the company as well at this point. So that's just something I also wanted to briefly share. I think could be quite helpful for some people. We do this for other things as well, like web performance and so on. But it's very, hopefully, it is quite helpful. Right? Yeah. Sorry, there was no question in there. I'm just running into monologue at some point. What about pizza? Sarah, have you tried any new recently, any interesting pizza recently?
No, I haven't had any pizza in a long time, actually, in months, I think.
Is it because you try to take good care of yourself, or is it because you just fell out of love with pizza?
No, I didn't. I think it's neither. And by the way, pizza is good. I mean, I do lead a very healthy lifestyle. I exercise, I eat healthy, and I make my own food and all of that stuff. But I make my own pizza and I love it. But I just haven't made any. Oh, thanks. I just haven't made any in a long time.
Yeah. All right. All right. Okay. This is maybe a time for me to bring up. I can speak about pizza forever, but I think that maybe you have some questions that you would like to bring up. One question that came from Nathan, actually: too many devs don't seem to understand semantic HTML as a foundation for accessibility, but are well versed in JavaScript frameworks. Where are junior developers starting the code journey these days?
I think a lot of if I were to answer this based on the trends that I'm seeing on Twitter and all those threads that go viral that teach you how to become a fantastic web developer and
a 10x developer, a 20x developer.
And like what, in 10 days, not 10 days, no, like in 2 months or so. I think one of the factors that play a role here, first of all, is it's the trends. So if a junior developer is just joining the web development community, the first thing they're going to see is all these trends everywhere. So those do play a factor. And another thing is something that I've gotten a lot of, when my Instagram was public, I got a lot of questions in my DMs and sometimes via email from junior developers who wanted to get into the field and were asking me for advice. And one thing that I always heard from them is that all the job listings that they see, well, they want to get into the field and they want to get a job because they need to make a living. That's the normal cycle of life. And all the job listings that they see, they're all like the latest JavaScript frameworks. And basically, they don't know where they should start. Always, the most frequent question was, where do I start? What do I need to learn first? I always said, start with foundations, HTML, CSS, and vanilla JavaScript. But then it was just me. There's not a lot of people who say that. Most of the people and all the trends that they're going to be subjected to on Twitter or other places is use the frameworks and then learn the foundations. And I think I saw a few tweets like that a few days ago on Twitter. Like it's good to start with the frameworks because they can get you up and running really fast. And yes, that's true. But if you start with the frameworks, how probable is it that you're going to go back and study the foundations later? You're probably just gonna, maybe, I think, or at least that's what I see, is you're gonna jump from one framework to another and you're always gonna be following whatever is the trendiest. So they don't know where to start. And I don't know, like, do we as the people who know, like, what do we need to do? Like, we need to be raising more awareness, we need to be sharing more knowledge, but how do we create a balance between what they're hearing from us and what they're hearing from all the trends?
Yeah, I think like from my end, what I've been thinking about this quite a bit actually, because I think many companies are struggling with finding good people, but they shouldn't be surprised because when they actually write in the job description React developer, they will not necessarily get a good JavaScript developer. There will be, I mean, if it's like the big ones, the Airbnbs and the ABMs and so on, they have their own processes and it takes weeks and maybe even months to get in there. So they will be vetting their people very, very well, right? But most companies, they just look for something that works for a particular framework, then you choose or you switch or you have another project with a different framework and then they're lost. And so the only thing I think we could do is to push maybe for baking accessibility somehow into those ecosystems. So we would have tons of resources on accessible Vue components and React components and whatnot. So even people who might not have necessarily a good foundation, they can still be able to produce good code and learn why it's important. Because right now, when I look around, there are tons of tutorials and video courses, of course, and YouTube videos and so on, which just produce extremely mediocre stuff. So I would rather be in a position where somebody doesn't quite understand the things, but produces good output than just the set of things.
I don't completely agree with that. No. I understand why you're saying this, but even if accessibility is baked into a framework, and of course we would need to look into how it is baked in and what does it mean to have it baked in. Even a component that has been made accessible, it may end up not being accessible when it is used in the wrong context. There's a lot of accessibility, in accessibility and semantics and HTML and markup that depends on the context. ARIA attributes depend on the context. Headings depend on the context. There's a lot of stuff that depends on context. So even if you have something built into the framework, and I think that might actually end up being, it might even end up being worse, because if they don't know how this thing was made accessible, what if they need to modify it for their own needs? They may end up breaking it. So they may end up slapping even more ARIA on it, just because if they see an ARIA label somewhere, oh, okay, this is going to take care of the accessible name, but that may not be the best solution. I've seen examples where people have slapped an ARIA label on an element. They didn't know that using ARIA label is going to override the content that's inside. Let's take the most basic example here, a button. If you have a button that says sign up, right? And you have an ARIA label on that button that says, click me. The click me, the text in the ARIA label is going to override the sign up. And there have been much worse examples, and I'm not talking about buttons here. I've seen examples of code where you have actual content in a list item, in a list, and the content, that's important content. That's content that the user needs to read. And they had ARIA labels on those lists, and they were using the ARIA label for something that's not even closely, remotely related to accessible names. So if they don't understand what the ARIA attributes are doing, why that markup has been chosen, how, like if I'm talking about Vue or React, if I have a component in that framework that is accessible, there's context, and you need to change certain things. If you don't understand how that thing was made accessible, how are you going to know how to modify it to your own needs and how to make it accessible in the context that you're going to use it in? I think knowledge, foundations are important, and I don't think that.
I mean, I totally agree with you on that, but I think that there's also a big group of people who are just using, like, just really building together their own little website. And usually when you do that in WordPress, when you do that in Squarespace, when you do this in Wix, when you do this in all these different platforms, the result is just not great. I mean, in terms of accessibility. And so if we have, let's say, a set of bulletproof, well, I mean, not bulletproof, you're right, it's impossible to just say like accessible by default. But things that at least build properly so that the button is a button, right? And link is a link and things like that. So even those things, I don't think that we have enough of those conversations either. And if we even had a couple of components built in or available, like think about something like a Tailwind, right? Like all these different, there are a huge number of interface libraries all around Tailwind. I would not personally, I mean, it would not be the ideal scenario, but I would not mind if there was a library like that, like Bootstrap or whatever you want to call it, which has all the right things, at least from the start, right? All of them. I'm not sure if we're there yet. I think there are a few interesting conversations in chat happening.
Actually, this is one of the things I love about accessibility is there is no one solution that fits all. And I think it's normal because we're building interfaces for people. And if you're building something for machines, you can probably like create a program or something and make it work on all of the machines, but it's not the same for people. It's not the same. The designs are made for people, for people's needs. And so the designs change based on context and who's using them, and the components and the code need to change accordingly. It's beautiful. I know that a lot of people think of this as a challenge, as something that they don't want to have to deal with. But if you're a designer and you're designing things for people, it's beautiful. I love these challenges. There's always these conversations happening about, the browser should take care of these things. I don't want to get too deep into this conversation because I have a very controversial opinion here. But I know a lot of people
like your controversial opinions. We welcome them.
Not everyone likes them. I personally don't want the browser to do all of these things for me. I think that, first of all, because the browser can't just know how something is going to be used all the time. Like we said, there's context and there's a lot of variables that come into play. Plus, I enjoy doing these things because they make you think about the user. They make you think about how something is. It's just beautiful, I think. I don't know if I'm being too
totally
idealistic here.
No. I think you're totally right. I just think that at this point, I'm just really wondering and maybe slightly worrying just in general about if we, let's say at Smashing, kind of failed in some way. Because what we have is plenty of articles and they can be found on via, I mean, not only Smashing, of course, they can be found via search engines and so on. But then, if I'm being very honest, it's like getting very personal. So we've been doing this now for what, 16 years, right? And when I look at the web today, it doesn't feel like, because my personal mission almost was to make sure that we're getting in a really nice place and we are going to share all these little CSS techniques and we're going to have all these discussions and all of that. And we did have them for a while. And we still do have them on Twitter and in other places, of course, and on Slack channels and so on and so forth. But when I look at the outcome that we get, sometimes I just wish it was a bit different. So do you think that we should have done something, I mean, not just Smashing, I mean, in general, the community, that we should be communicating to like hardcore JavaScript developers differently, or what should we be doing differently? Because if we, if it evolves like that, we will still have the same fight that we're going to fight in like 5 or 10 years from now.
I think that
this is what I was thinking about. I was thinking about baking things in some way or the other. I mean, your course is a wonderful example of that. Like if that becomes the mainstream and everybody's going to just have to learn it to understand, at least how to write proper HTML, CSS, and semantics along the way, that would be great. But again, there are a lot of people who just want to get results quickly. And then if they produce something accessible, even as a coincidence, I'd be happy about that. But it's probably unlikely to happen.
I think one way that, first of all, every single person on their own, they can only do so much. So I tweet, you share articles on Smashing Magazine. I think as long as you're doing everything you can do, I mean, what else can you do, right? Maybe we can, like, as a community of people, join efforts to do something different in the future. But for example, one thing I would suggest is if a conference, for example, is focused on, if it's a React conference or that is focused on a specific JavaScript framework or community, maybe they should or they could bring in more speakers that can somehow address accessibility for JavaScript developers. Basically try to integrate accessibility into the different communities, if that makes sense. So at conferences and articles.
Oh, Sarah, I have an idea.
Yes.
Don't you think you should be working, maybe not should be, you could be working, I don't know, on sort of a video course on accessibility for JavaScript developers?
Well, my course is targeted at all developers, including JavaScript developers.
Okay.
So the knowledge is, I call it, it's going to be evergreen, hopefully. So the foundational knowledge is going to be beneficial for you for years to come. And if you're building anything on the web, if you're a web developer, building websites or applications, whether you're front end or back end, you will benefit. You will definitely learn accessibility well in this course. The backend, my friend who is the backend developer on the course website, he has already learned a lot about accessibility from some of our conversations. Like we did some things about live regions and form validation, because he's handling the form validation and Ajax stuff. So and I was like, okay, so this should be a live region, this should not be, we should move focus here, we should do this and do that. And he's been enjoying them. So accessibility is not boring, it's not difficult, it's not, well, not always difficult, because there's a lot more than just the technical implementation when it comes to accessibility. But it's not always hard, I promise. And hopefully,
Yeah, and there's also a point that Nikki brought up. I'd like to see more on how developers can use different types of assistive technology so they can check their work. This is another story about accessibility testing. It's still every single time when I play as, or I play a screen reader, many developers I'm talking to, they hear it for the very first time. They never really exposed to it, and they find it confusing for them at first, and they don't know how to work with this, and it's indeed that in the end it doesn't become kind of tested. There are also maybe always kind of a QA people who do the testing, but this is not always kind of a part of development. I guess this is the only way to change that is only through education and kind of little trainings, and bring people like Sarah maybe to explain a little bit more about how that works.
Actually, there's people who are better than me that they could bring in is assistive technology users, because your experience as, if you're not disabled and you're using a screen reader, you're not going to, someone using a screen reader on a daily basis is going to have certain expectations that are most likely going to be different from yours. What they expect to hear. Maybe, for example, if you're building a dynamic spa single page application and you think that it's a good idea to use a live region here or to announce something there, but that might be too disruptive for someone using a screen reader and they may prefer something different. I'll just give a quick, very simple example from something that I've built before, and I asked someone who used a screen reader about it. So I had we had a list of products, and we had the filters, where you filter the products either by type, by price, and you have those checkboxes and filters on the side. I was thinking about how that could be implemented. That was years ago. I was still getting started with accessibility. And I was thinking, since the content is being dynamically changed in the main area, should I be announcing something? Should there be some sort of notifications? And the solution to that was actually much, much, much simpler. You don't have to always overcomplicate things. The solution was very simple. Just make it clear in the filters section area that results will filter as you, I don't have, that's not the exact wording. Yeah, but just like you say, results will filter as you're typing. The results will filter when you choose a filter. I don't know how to say it there. So you don't always need to overcomplicate things, and screen reader users often have expectations that are different from what we might think. So even if you know how to fire up a screen reader and use the shortcuts, it's very good to test a component to see if the name of an element is being announced properly, if the headings are there. That's the kind of testing that I personally do, but I think that nothing can really replace the experience of someone who uses a screen reader on a daily basis, no matter how experienced you are. I know, I think that Adrian can also confirm, because he works with, he has worked and he has seen and witnessed and done usability testing with assistive technology users, it's always different. They can always provide insights that you can probably not get on your own.
Yeah. There's also a question from Jess. I think that thank you so much for writing all the things in the chat. Obviously, we have only 5 minutes left, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And thank you, Adrian, for writing all the notes and all the links as well. Maybe a question about tooling from Jess. Jess sometimes uses the Firefox accessibility tab in the DevTools to check for accessibility issues. Would you consider it as a good, comprehensive tool? What else would you recommend, Sarah?
I personally use Chrome's accessibility tool, mainly for the accessibility tree view, because I prefer that over the one in Firefox. I just think, for me, it's better. It just gives me the overview that I want in a better way than Firefox does. As far as accessibility testing, it depends on what you're testing. So if you just want to get a look at the accessibility tree, my recommendation, or my preference, not recommendation, my preference is the Chrome DevTools or Chromium DevTools, available in Chrome and Chromium Edge. Depends on what you're testing. If you want to see if the heading outline makes sense, you could use a bookmarklet, for example. There are many bookmarklets available for different browsers. If you want to check the landmarks, you can check that, maybe using a screen reader and the rotor and voiceover, or the equivalent in NVDA. So it depends on what you're testing. If you're doing keyboard testing, you're just going to be using the tab key on your mouse, or you could use the accessibility insights, which also shows you numbers. It basically shows you the tabbing
from Microsoft,
path.
right?
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's that one's also available as a Chrome extension. So it depends on what you're testing. If the Firefox DevTools help you get insights into the thing that you need, then thumbs up. Otherwise, what I do know for sure is that probably, I think, they don't contain the tools for everything. So you will probably use a combination of bookmarklets and DevTools and other things.
Right. And what do you do about, let's say, automated testing? So, for example, for the project I'm working on, there is Site Improve that's being used, which basically scans every page every day to detect any critical, non-critical accessibility issues. Do you have any experience with something like that? Like any kind of tools that are running daily or weekly?
I use Axe, but I don't rely on them. So the way I use automated accessibility tools is either as a first pass, just a quick pass to catch very quick common accessibility issues, or as a last pass. And I did the last pass on my on the course website. So I know that I've built everything properly, but I thought maybe I was missing an ID here or there. So I ran Axe, and yes, I was actually, like, there was a missing ID on one element that I was referencing an area labeled by. Automated accessibility testing tools catch only somewhere between 30 to 50% tops of errors. And a lot of the really critical accessibility issues may not even be caught by these tools. So I would not rely on them, as you need someone doing the testing.
Makes sense, right? Robert, by the way, you're wondering about whether this is going to be recorded. Yes, it is being recorded, and obviously we will be making this recording available as well. Let's see what else is happening in the chat. Oh, thank you so much. Thank you, Jess, for joining us, of course. Right.
Good developers for what Chuck is asking about, recommending some good developers.
Well, who can probably know a bit of accessibility? I can point to one.
Disabled adults. Okay, so developers or disabled adults. You can unmute yourself and ask the question if you prefer, I think.
Yes, for an audience of cognitively disabled adults. Can you suggest some developers?
So for what kind of product are you building?
This is a website.
Okay, so you need web developers that are proficient with accessibility.
You got that right. Yep.
Okay.
Good. They're like rare animals.
Do you need someone to?
Maybe you could send me an email.
Okay, if you share your email with me, I'll be happy to do that. Yeah.
Okay, I'll send it to you on your website. Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. Please do. Thanks.
You've got an email on your website?
Yes, it's
Good.
hello@sarasoueidan.com.
Okay, I'll send you an email. Okay.
Okay.
Excellent. I'm wondering, by the way, just in general, that would be maybe the final question now as well. Do you, maybe you already answered it at one point, Sarah. Do you know any website which would be good to get accessibility testing done by users of screen reader software or any disabled adults? Or would it be any way like, yeah?
I think we mentioned something like this in a previous Smashing Hour, not this one.
Yeah.
I remember there were a couple of websites that offered these services. So a group of disabled people that offer testing services. I don't have any, like, I can't remember any names.
I
but
don't
if
remember
Adrian,
either.
If Adrian has any names at hand that he can share, I don't know.
Yeah, because oh, here we go. Marcus has shared it. Makeitfable.com maybe, or Nobility does such a testing, because actually this is something that comes up quite a bit. There is usually a little bit of budget for testing, and then this testing better be properly used. So that's really helpful. Well, thank you so much for bringing this up in the chat as well. Well, I'm afraid that we are at the end of the hour at this point. So some of you who are just attending now, that might have been a conflict because, of course, Europe went all into the winter time zone mode. And then I think US did not, or just happening now. It's very confusing for me. Like, do we really need to change the hours, Sarah? Do we need to go back and go forward?
I don't know. I don't like it. I don't like it because when the days get shorter, I feel like I have less time, and every single day I feel like I need more time. I need more hours in a day, not less.
Okay, so Robert has very strong opinion. 3 p.m. onwards, dark with 4 exclamation marks. That sounds dark indeed. All right, well, but thank you so much everyone for joining. At this point, I hope that there were some useful bits in there as well. Sarah, as always a pleasure to learn from you. Very excited about your course. Where can people sign up for your course? Would you like to share it one more time?
Okay, so it's
for the updates to your course, I mean.
The newsletter, they can subscribe to it at practical-accessibility today. That's my UPS again in the background. Oliver, no, well, if you missed it, there's going to be a recording.
Yes.
So practical accessibility today, I don't want to make any rush announcements, but I may start pre-orders soon. I'm working on the last stretch. I'm doing everything myself, so there's going to be recording and editing the videos. Hopefully, I don't know how much time that's going to take, but I will probably open up pre-orders maybe next week or sometime this month. I'm almost ready. I think I just need to be mentally ready for that before anything else.
Great.
That's it.
That sounds great.
Thank you, Jess.
Well, yeah, sorry about that, Oliver. So yeah, so the time zones can be tricky at times, I'm afraid. But obviously you will find it also in, well, if you signed up, you will also find the recording in an email that we'll be sending out to you. So you just have that. In the meantime, I just hope that, Sarah, you're going to finish the thing, well, the video course soon, and then we're going to have the pleasure of actually watching it or exploring it from the start till the finish. How long is it going to be? Can you share a bit more about the length and how many segments you're going to get, or how is it? How is it going to be structured? Oh, sorry. Oh, yes. Yeah, I was just wondering.
Sorry, because I was answering a question in the chat.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I was just wondering, can you share a little bit of insight about just how long it's going to be, how many segments, chapters? Just
I'm calling them chapters because I wasn't really sure. Like, I'm not doing any modules, because I think that the concept of a module is you have a module that has multiple segments or chapters in it. I don't know. I'm not doing that. So I'm basically at the moment there's more than 35 chapters that alternate between theory and application, and I want to add more, but I wanted to just yes, and each of them is somewhere like there's let's say it's an average of 30 minutes. So 35 times 30 minutes. How many hours?
That's a lot of minutes. That's like a lot of minutes. Yeah, I don't know.
It's a very long course. And look, I'm going to be completely honest with you. I know we're over time, but I'm just going to say something. It's a little add more course. I wanted to add, and I probably would. That's why on the course website, it's going to say that the course currently contains more than 35 chapters, but I didn't specify how many chapters exactly because I plan on adding more. But I needed to limit the number of chapters that are going to be the core of the course, the core content, because otherwise I would have just continued working on it indefinitely. And I've been working on the course full time for 8 months, and I haven't made any money during these 8 months. So I'm looking forward to finishing it, and then I'll continue working on it afterwards. So but the
So, Leute.
Oh, I think there was a bit of a connection issue in there, but that's okay. Well, we're definitely very excited to see that
Paul mal in seine Schuhe springen?
Oh, hold on. I think we can hear somebody as well. Excellent. Well, Sarah, can you hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear. Can you hear me?
Yeah, that's all. That's all good. Well, we're very excited to see this coming to fruition. It's about time, Sarah. It's about time, because we also want to, and I will want to use this opportunity publicly to bring you into the Smashing Conf next year. Now that you will have your course finished, maybe that would be an opportunity that will present itself. But we can talk about it later if you want to.
Yes, well, we can talk about it now or later. So next year, I'm going to be speaking at only a few conferences. So if you want me to speak at a conference, you should probably let me know.
Yeah, well, I'm letting you know right now, actually. But I will be sending you. I will sending you an email as well. That'd be great.
Okay.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us as well. I'm very much excited about just everything like happening in the accessibility community. Thank you all so much for everyone who participated in the chat as well. Sarah, big plans for tonight?
No, actually, I'm just gonna get something to snack on, and just I'm an early bird, so I sleep early and I wake up early, so I'm probably not going to be awake for a long time anyway.
That's good. Well, have a good sleep then, and talk to you very soon then, Sarah. Thank you so much for joining. And thanks everyone. See you next time.